This is beautiful. What is that, velvet?
Peace and love is the key.
You are now about to experience the J&J-Life podcast with your host, Reya'Sekhmet.
But my name combines Rhea, which means a connection to Ra.
J&J-Life podcast. Please
Smash that like button. Peace and love is the key.
What's happening, Aakhu'Ra family? Peace and love is the key. I'm Reya'Sekhmet, also known as Reya'Sekhmet. Thank you for tuning in to the J&J-Life podcast, where we will talk about the stuff that really matters, like why our story, our family, and our culture are so important. Peace to Baba Roland Martin and Aunt Teslin Figaro. We have Baba Asar sitting in on the discussion coming from you from our Aakhu'Ra studio here in Des Moines, Iowa. So guess what, family? We've got none of our tutors, historian, educator, and national political commentator. He's been a leading voice in African and African American history and empowerment, and we are honored to have him on the show. So without further ado, please welcome Baba Michael Imhotep to the J&J-Life podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thanks for having me. Have you had Roland Martin here on the show?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. I was just curious.
Peace to the brother Roland Martin.
Yeah. I'm on the show every Friday. I was just wondering if he let you talk at all if you interviewed him. But okay. But go ahead.
Blessings, Barbara. So, how are you doing on this fantastic day?
All is well, Reya'Sekhmet, and thank you for having me again on the J&J-Life podcast. And family, as we always do, we like to give reverence to the ancestors and the elders for all they have done and are doing. And today, we're taking a journey through time from the remarkable civilizations of Kush and Kemet to present day here in 2025. We'll explore African history, the truth about Juneteenth, and how we can reclaim our narrative from a stronger and for a stronger future. And Brother Michael, as I mentioned in the green room, I actually took your class, Ancient Kemet, the Moors and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, a little over a year and a half ago. And I just want to say that your course really helped me. It helped me help my family by teaching them on how deep our history goes beyond what we're taught in school. It helped me, it helped me teach them that we can't just start studying our history in slavery. We have to go back thousands of years. And again, I'm no teacher by no stretch of the word, brother, but if you learn something, then job done. And Reya'Sekhmet has taken that to the 10th power.
Okay,
so,
good.
Yeah. So to understand everything, Reya'Sekhmet, and to answer your question, I'm really excited today. I'm ready to get it on. Ashe.
Okay, now that we've got exchange greetings, and to maximize our time, let's get right into it.
Let's do it.
Barbara Michael.
Yes.
We want to dive into your journey because every great leader has a story, one that shapes their missions and wisdom. My question is two-part. First, will you share with the family what was like life for you growing up? And second, what experiences guided you toward the path you walk today?
Okay, so growing up, I grew up here in Detroit, Michigan. I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s. So what was it like growing up? Well, I remember so in 1970s, there was a resurgence of African pride. There was a resurgence. People were wearing afros. You still had early 1970s. You still had the element of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. You still had that element. And even when I was 5 or 6 years old, even though I didn't know necessarily about the Black Panthers, I knew about Dr. King and Malcolm X. And so you had a period of time, early 1970s, the Jackson 5. You had 1977 Roots. I remember when Roots actually aired for the first time on ABC, and I watched it. It was a mini series. It aired at night, each night, I think about a whole week, and I watched it with my parents. Okay, so a lot of it I didn't understand. Some of it understood, I was probably 6 years, right around 6 years old when I saw it. So I grew up in a household where my mother was a school teacher, okay, and she was a math and science teacher, and I had relatives who were school teachers. So I grew up with books in the home. And my parents are still married to this day. They're in their 80s, but I grew up with
Peace to
books
the
in the
elders.
home. Oh yeah, yeah. I grew up with books in the home. I grew up with two full sets of encyclopedias back before. This is way before the internet. All right, we had like the actual books, the encyclopedias, Encyclopedia Britannica. I grew up with a globe and an atlas and the almanac, things of this nature. So in second grade at McFarland Elementary School, there was a special education teacher named Mr. James. And Mr. James had a after school program called the African History Club. Okay. So I joined, and it was open to everybody. Okay. So he taught special ed, but the African History Club was open to everybody. So it was an after school program. So I joined it for a short period of time, the African History Club. And we learned about African history, African American history. He talks about Dr. King, but also Malcolm X, and that planted the seeds right there. You know, seeds were planted by my parents. Trips to the library to get books during the summertime, for instance. My mother would take myself and my younger brother to the library, and we had to check out a book and do a book report on it. And during the summer, to keep us reading, to keep us active, okay? And she would give us homework to do during, like in the morning time during the summer, and we couldn't go outside and play until we did our homework. So that the African History Club and the information coming, you know, from my parents, things like that, that helped to lay the foundation. Then when I go to college in fall at 1989 at Wayne State University here in Detroit, you know, I go to a meeting of the Black Student Union. And this is around the time where you have conscious hip hop out. You know, you had Public Enemy and the X Clan, and the Poor Righteous Teachers are going to come a couple years later, things like this. So even though you had NWA out, even though you had Ice-T, there was still some type of balance in the music. And when we heard the X Clan, man, and the X Clan actually came to Wayne State University. Professor X, Brother J, okay, Professor X, the overseeing the Black Watch years on the 9 on the black hand side with the key. All right, they came to Wayne State with the key. And when they came to Wayne State, man, it was like I saw an all set, you know, coming. We were blown away by this, right? So so we had the conscious hip hop, and inside of that conscious hip hop, they were dropping snippets of history. They would have excerpts of Malcolm X, excerpt of Minister Farrakhan, you know, the X Clan talking about Osiris and Isis and Horus and things like that. So, but what it did was the really, really super conscious brothers and sisters on the campus, it caused us to go to them to start asking them questions about what we're hearing in the music, right? And you know, so when I earlier in 1989, there was a sit-in at Wayne State University. African American students took over the financial aid department at the Helen Newberry Joy building, and they were demanding a Africana Studies department at Wayne State. So at Wayne State University in Detroit, back then was probably almost 90% Black. You had these different cultural studies departments, but you didn't have an Africana Studies department, right? So they were fueled by the conscious hip hop. Okay. And we're saying, wait a second, our tuition dollars are paying for all these other ethnic studies curriculums and departments. And we're not against learning different cultures, but you're in a city that's 90% Black. You don't have an Africana Studies department. So that caused the Africana Studies department to be created. And so later like 94, 95 at Wayne State, I took classes in the Africana Studies department as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you have those different instances, but it's really at Wayne State right about 1990. We have conscious hip hop. Then in 92, we have the Malcolm X movie that drops. And around the time that the Malcolm X movie comes out, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it just totally blows my mind. The autobiography of Malcolm X, that book, man, just totally blew my mind. So it's going to have those things right there going to put me on that trajectory. And then also something else that's very influential was the TV show A Different World, right? Because the TV show A Different World, we like part of when it first came out, I was in high school, Cass Technical High School here in Detroit. Then I'm in college. So a lot of the things that we see every week on the TV, we are experiencing that. Okay. So one of the reasons why I joined the Pan-African Student Union at Wayne State in like 1994 is because I saw it discussed on A Different World. And it demystified it to me.
Oh, shit.
So it caused me to go and seek out this brother named Abayomi Ezekwe, and we're still friends to this day. He was the president of the Pan-African Student Union. And a lot of people thought he was just like so super conscious, he was beyond talking to. But I just went up and talked to him, and he would answer my questions. He was an older brother even then. He had gray hair even then 30 years ago. Abayomi has always had gray hair since I've known him, right? Okay, so he was a graduate student. But I would sit in every Wednesday in the Student Center building. So the Student Center building was the building where, people could go hang out. They had student activities, what have you. Every Wednesday, the students sit in the Student Center building, the different organizations could set up an information table to let people know what they did. And the Pan-African Student Union had a table. Abayomi Ezekwe was there. So I would go sit and talk to Abayomi for hours. And I'll talk to him about what we're studying in, Africana Studies classes. And I was a business major. So we're talking, I'm talking about business. He was a socialist. We're talking about history, politics, and he knows like the entire political history of the entire continent of Africa. Okay. Wow. This brother, he's interviewed by news outlets all across the world. Al Jazeera, I've interviewed him on the African History Network show. So talking to Abayomi, joining the Pan-African Student Union, learning about Fred Hampton, the Black Panther parties, Kwame Nkrumah, all of that. So those are things that put me on the trajectory.
Okay. Yeah, wow. You said, you mentioned X-Clan. I'm gonna try to decipher everything you said. You mentioned X-Clan. Reya'Sekhmet actually has a piece that she did on conscious rap.
Okay.
And we feature the group X-Clan, and we pay homage to the group X-Clan, and she did a phenomenal job. I don't want to give too much away to the family out there that's watching. Okay. But just know that coming soon, Reya'Sekhmet's piece on X-Clan.
That's good. And also very quickly, there was a TV show came out of South Carolina about 1990, early 1990s, called For the People. For the People, hosted by journalist Listervelt Middleton. It came on every week, and he interviewed each week one of the African Center scholars. So that's why I got to first see Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who's one of my teachers. I know Dr. J. I know his wife, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, as well. You see behind me the poster, African Scholar Warriors. You see Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small. They're two of my teachers. But that's where I got to first see Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Yusuf Ben Yakinen, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Mariba Ani. We got to see them each week. So, and I would have an audio recorder, a tape recorder, and I put up to the TV. This is before we had a VCR. I put up to the TV, and I would record it each week, and then go back and listen to it over and over and over again. Right. So that TV show For the People had a deep impact on me. And then later in life, I get to meet some of those scholars who I saw on the television.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's just Ashe, brother.
Yes.
That's deep.
Oh, thank you.
I know you often talk about how history is directly tied to economics and politics.
Oh, yes, yes,
And
yes.
and there was one more brother in that picture that we see behind you, and
Yeah. Dr.
that's the
Clark.
elder Dr. Charles Finch.
Oh, Dr. Charles Finch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which we're going to talk a little bit about him,
Yeah.
later on in the interview. But I just wanted to point that out I see Brother Smalls and the elder Dr. Jeffries, and I can't see who the one with the glasses is.
Well, that's Professor Edward Scobie there.
Okay.
It's not Charles Finch here. We got Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, Dr. Clark in the middle, Professor James Small when he had locks. Professor James Small used to have hair. Professor James Small with locks, and that's Professor Edward Scobie. Okay. I know Dr. Charles Finch because I interviewed him, but yeah, that's Professor Edward Scobie right there.
Yes, and we definitely watched Dr. Charles Finch interview that you did.
Yes.
We're gonna talk about that a little bit, right, Reya'Sekhmet?
Okay.
Yeah. And so when we look at history, brother, we see that African civilizations have thriving economies, trade networks, and systems of governance that were disrupted by colonialism and enslavement. How do you see the connection between ancient African history and the fight for economic independence today? And how can understanding our past help us reclaim financial power?
Okay, so very good question. First of all, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, when they teach, as well as when I teach, because I'm one of their students, they talk about the pyramid principle. And if you think about, usually I show a pyramid of Khafre and Giza, and we see that the foundation of the pyramid is African history and culture. African history and culture gives us our values, our interests, and our principles, our VIPs. It gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through, okay? And our history and culture is tied to our self-esteem, our self-development, our self-worth. The two sides of the pyramid are economic empowerment and political empowerment, okay? So the economic empowerment deals with understanding economic systems and how we engage in business, how we engage in economics, and the political empowerment that deals with understanding politics, okay? And politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So this is how we have to understand politics. What happens is if I could do a screen share, I want to, if I could possibly do the screen share, I want to show this to you. Okay. Is the pyramid principle, is it showing up?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you see Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor James Small. Okay. So we have the economic empowerment and the political empowerment. These are two sides of the pyramid. The foundation is African history and culture. So it doesn't matter how much money we have. If we're dealing with a colonized mind, if we've been taught to hate ourselves, taught to hate who we are and love who we can't be, it doesn't matter how much money we have, we're going to spend the overwhelming majority of it with white people, okay, especially. So the economic empowerment deals with how we engage in economics and the type, and not just the type of businesses that we have, but how they're structured. So when we study African history and African American history, we learn about the cooperative economics. We learn about the co-op system. Whether we talk about the Free African Society in 1787, whether we talk about the Colored Merchants Association in 1928, okay, these co-ops. So this influences how we engage in economics. Do we try to put red, black, and green over white capitalism, or do we embrace traditional forms of economic empowerment? And then understanding politics as the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. Voting is only one smart of politics, but voting is a very important part of politics. So we deal with political empowerment and understanding that we have to control the economics and the politics in our communities, and it's history and culture that gives us that foundation, okay? And so, and when we deal with the economic empowerment, it also deals with the type of businesses that we have. And the reason why I show it like this, the reason why this is so important is Dr. Leonard Jeffrey says that we have to have a synthesis of all three of these: the African history and culture, the economics, and the politics. When we study any of the great African civilizations that we like to talk about, whether it's ancient Kemet, whether it's Nubia, whether it's Ghana, Songhai, Mali, any of them, right? They have a cultural and historical foundation, whether the history is a written history or an oral history, but they have that cultural and historical foundation that gives them a cultural paradigm to see reality through. They have some type of economic infrastructure, whether it's doing trade with other neighboring villages or nations, whether they have an African marketplace, whether they have various industries where they produce products, things like this. They have some type of economic infrastructure, and they have some type of political, some form of political government as well. Okay. So what we have to understand is that we also have to have a synthesis of this as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you broke that down, because that was a question that I've been waiting to ask you for about 1.5 years.
Okay.
I learned that in your class, and I'm looking at my notes that I took from your class, and I only got half the pyramid filled out. So
there you go.
You just filled it out for me, so I appreciate that.
Right, no problem.
Ashe, Bob Michael, that makes so much sense. If we don't understand how our ancestors built wealth, we won't know how to build it today. Baba John Henry Clark taught that knowledge is recurring. And from my understanding, that means the wisdom of the past is always available to us if we study it. My question is, for someone who is just beginning their journey into African history, what would you recommend the first steps they should take? Or better yet, what foundational knowledge should they start with to truly understand who we are?
Well, people can start with different points of intersection. People can start at different points. Okay, some people may start with the autobiography of Malcolm X. And let's see, I want to turn the screen share off here. Some people may start with the autobiography of Malcolm X. Other people, one book that I recommend everybody reads is Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder. I read this book first, probably 1994, I think it was. This is my second copy of it because my first copy was falling apart.
Kind of small. Can you hold that up one more time?
Oh yeah,
I think we got that book, but can you? Yeah, there you go.
Now Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder.
Okay.
So this book will blow your mind. And then Dr. John Henry Clark also wrote, I think Dr. Clark wrote the foreword to this because it is, I know Dr. Clark has a statement. Yeah, Dr. Clark wrote the introduction to this book as well. So Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, the autobiography of Malcolm X. People will have different points where they intersect into this history. They may read, they may see a documentary. They may start with Dr. King. They may start with Dr. King because Dr. King studied African history. Dr. King in 1957, when Ghana wins its independence, he goes to Ghana for the celebration and to be with Kwame Nkrumah. And he goes back to Ghana on the anniversary of their independence each year. So they may start with the civil rights movement. Dr. King wrote 5 books. This is his last book. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? So people can start with different points. They may start with the documentary series Eyes on the Prize. Okay, they may start there. They may start with the documentary on Malcolm X, Make It Plain. Okay. Yeah. So different periods, and it could be starting with celebrations that we celebrate, whether it's Kwanzaa. Okay. And then you start getting into and studying the history of Kwanzaa, and you read Dr. Maulana Karenga's book dealing with
Mhm.
Kwanzaa, an African American holiday, where he deals with the ancient African first harvest festivals that Kwanzaa is based upon and the various cultures that it comes from.
Okay.
Yeah. So the different points that people can intersect into this. If you read one of the books that we read in high school, it may be Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr.
Yep.
It may be this book that gets you into that history. It may be something like Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism by Dr. John Henry Clark. Right.
Mhm.
So people will have different points where they intersect into this history.
Awesome.
Ashe. I can really appreciate how you broke that down.
Yeah, facts.
Oh,
Facts.
thanks.
How you doing over there?
Great.
Good. So, Brother Michael,
Yes.
we're taught that as a people, we must control our own education because whoever controls the education system controls the future. And family, and I say this this way, for the sake of this conversation, know that when we use the term black African, Black American, or African for that matter, we're talking about the same people, us Black people. And you know, and I want to apologize, Brother Michael, you know, early on, but sometimes we get our brothers and our sisters who may want to challenge what we call ourselves. So I'm just trying to get ahead of the semantics. You know, all in the inbox, in the comment section. You know, everybody has different approaches to what defines blackness. So I'm just kind of just putting the disclaimer out there, so to say.
Sure. Well, you're dealing with understanding the history of a people that have different branches of that history. Okay. Yeah. So you have some people who say, oh, well, we're Moors. Okay. Well, yeah. when you go study, if you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., chapter 2, page 46 edition, he talks about the names that African people had in this country when European settlers first come. He says we would call blackamoors, we would call Moors, we would call Negers, Negers, and Nagars, Negars, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but when we deal with the term Moor, that comes from Moros, that comes from the Greek Moros. We know that the Moors originate in Africa. We know that when you study the teachings of Professor Kabahaya Wapakamenei, one of my teachers, we know that the Moors are descendants of a larger group of African people called the Garamantes, okay, in Northeast Africa. We know that the Moors are going to be in these African people are going to be in the Nile Valley region of Africa, and they're going to go into Europe in 711 AD, okay, into the Iberian Peninsula. And today known as Spain and Portugal, they're going to take these teachings from the Nile Valley region all throughout Africa. We know the Moors are African people, okay? People talk about, well, the term African American is not a nationality. Well, nobody said it was. It's an ethnic group.
Right.
The term African American dates back to 1782 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the early recorded usage of the term African American. It wasn't introduced by Reverend Jesse Jackson. I don't know why people think that. He reintroduced the term.
I've heard that a lot in my studies. And
he reintroduced the term African American because Malcolm X used the term African American April 3rd, 1964, when he delivers his speech, The Ballad of the Bullet, in Cleveland, Ohio, at Corey Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. So people have to really understand the chronology of this. The term Afro-American dates back to the 1830s. Mm-hmm. So you have the Afro-American newspaper, one of the first Black newspapers that goes back to about the 1880s. You have the Afro-American, you have the National Afro-American League, which is founded about 1892. That's one of the first civil rights organizations. Then you have the Afro-American Council, founded in 1898, which really picks up where the Afro-American League leaves off. And then when we study organizations, that we have in this country, say in the 1700s, they have the term African in them. The Free African Society, founded in 1787 by Absalom Jones and Richard Allen. African Methodist Episcopal Church, 1816. Richard Allen, the Grand African Lodge, things like this. So when you study this chronology of history, is different than what a lot of people think, and they throw these different terms around. But if we want to take it back to Dr. David Imhotep, the first Americans were Africans, documented
I was
evidence.
I was going to bring in peace to the ancestor.
Yeah.
But I was going to bring his book out for today, but I didn't know, which direction we was going to go.
And I have his book here, man, in the office. I can't find it, but one book I have here. Okay, Renoka Rashidi, Black Star: The African Presence in Early Europe. This deals with the history of the Moors in Europe and what they're taking into Europe. Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Okay, you have essays from Renoka Rashidi, Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay, Dr. Wayne Chandler, who just wished me a happy birthday a few days ago. Things like this. So there's no need to argue over names. There's no need to argue over that, because we had different names during different periods of time based upon the language that you're dealing with.
So you know what? It just makes me, it brings me to a question.
Sure.
And Reya'Sekhmet, is it okay if I ask one more question? All right. So it just brings me to the question, is how do we activate the unconscious mind of Black communities, those who have been conditioned to accept distorted narratives of misinformation, or if they're just disengaged from their own history? Like, how? I don't know if that's for you to answer, but that's what comes to my mind when I'm thinking about what we're talking about.
Okay, so first, I think it's important. I explain to people what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. A people's history and culture needs to teach them how to deal with the problems of the past in the present and the future to meet the needs of the community. So if the history is looked at something that only deals with the past and is not relevant to today, you can't have an impact on people. What I do is I deal with history, economics, law, and politics, the acronym HELP. History, economics, law, and politics. I connect history to exactly what's going on today to understand how we navigate throughout this, how we use the history and culture as a tool to empower ourselves. You talk about education. Education is extremely important. We look at Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, September 9th, 1915, who in 1926 creates Negro History Week, which becomes Black History Month. Dr. Woodson was an educator, okay? He had a PhD in American history, second African-American to graduate with a PhD from Harvard after Dr. W.B. Du Bois. Dr. Woodson said that the history of African-Americans had to be taught in every school across the country, okay? Because he knew that understanding our history was not just for us. Yes, we need to understand our history, but the way you treat a people is based upon what you know about a people. What you know about a people is based upon what you've been taught about a people. So when you have people who have not been taught our history, who don't understand our accomplishments and achievements, only see us as descendants of those who were conquered and shackled and changed by their ancestors, that influences how they see us. So he understood that the connected to racial prejudice was the fact that our history was not being taught in the schools. So we have to, one, learn our history, teach it to our children, but our history has to be taught in schools all across the country the same way that their history is taught in schools all across the country.
Facts.
Okay? Yeah.
Facts. Yeah. And I know you've been waiting on this part of this, right? And that is, Brother Michael, Cleopatra is one of the most famous figures from ancient Egypt.
Sure.
But there's a lot of misinformation even about her. And and I know you've spoken about how historical narratives are manipulated to disconnect African people from our greatness. That's what we've been talking about.
Right.
And we did watch the episode you did with Baba Charles Finch.
Okay.
So Cleopatra is often portrayed as a European ruler, and her African heritage is either ignored or debated. But beyond her identity, she was a strategist, a diplomat, and a leader who understood the complexities of global politics. My question is, do you feel it's the race piece that people misunderstand about Cleopatra's story? And if so, why is it important for us to reclaim her true legacy? And I want you to speak to the 8 to 12-year-olds in the room and those adults who may not understand this as well, right?
Okay. So, and I'll probably give a few articles as reference. Okay.
Okay.
So back in 2023, you had the documentary series from Jada Pinkett Smith, African Queens. And one of those installments, one was dealing with Queen Nzinga of the area that's Angola. Another one was dealing with Cleopatra. It caused controversy because it depicted a biracial woman as Cleopatra, who looked of African descent. Okay. And Adele James is the woman who portrayed Cleopatra. So there was all this controversy because this goes to really the power of media. And so many Americans, what they know about Cleopatra came from the portrayal of Cleopatra by Elizabeth Taylor. Okay. The white actress Elizabeth Taylor.
Yep.
And seeing this movie, decades ago. But what a lot of historians were saying, and what they were saying in the documentary is most of them were not saying conclusively she was what we would call today Black. They were, because in ancient times, so she rules around 47 BC. Okay. In ancient times, the concept of race does not exist. So what we call the terms that we're using to describe race today, that didn't exist back then. But understanding this, she would be what we would call biracial. Most likely she would be what we would call biracial, and she would look more like Adele James than she would Elizabeth Taylor. Okay. I interviewed Dr. Malefi Asante, who's the author of dozens of books. I forgot exactly how many books Malefi has written now, and he's the chair of the Africana Studies or Afro-American Studies department at Temple University. This is one of his books right here. The Egyptian Philosophers, Ancient African Voices from Imhotep to Akhenaten, Dr. Malefi Asante.
Okay.
And Malefi was
that book.
Yeah. Malefi was saying that it's important to understand at this period of time, even though they had been already conquered by the Greeks, by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, and she was of the line of the Ptolemies, where they had these Greek rulers after Alexander ruling Egypt. The base of Egypt, the majority of the people in Egypt at this time were still what we would call Black African. Even though you had intermixing, even though you had other people from other countries, the majority of those people were still Black African. Now, also her sister, there was a documentary that came out a few years ago, and it talked about her sister was Arsinoe. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. Arsinoe.
Yeah, I think we call her Arsinoe.
Arsinoe, yeah, I'm sorry, Arsinoe, and Cleopatra's sister. That was Cleopatra's sister, and this documentary talks about how their mother had an African skeleton. So this is an article called The Modern Racial Politics of Cleopatra, What's Happening. This is from denison.edu, Denison University. And just a quick snippet here, it says the most prominent gaps are found in Cleopatra's mother's identity and her grandmother's. In 2009, a group of BBC, British Broadcasting Company, BBC presenters, archaeologists proposed, based on analysis of a body claimed to be that of Arsinoe, Cleopatra's sister, that their mother, quote, had an African skeleton, end quote. It has also variously been argued that her paternal grandmother was indigenous Egyptian and so potentially, quote unquote, Black. Despite these attempts to understand the anomalies in Cleopatra's family history, for the most part, when asked, most scholars and students of Greco-Roman world will say without hesitation, quote, Cleopatra VII was white, of Macedonia descent, as were all of the Ptolemy rulers who lived in Egypt, end quote. They often even dismiss the speculations that she may not be white as not credible, okay? So it goes on to say that the reality, however, is that white and Black are not ancient categories of race or ethnicity, and Egyptian, Macedonian, Greek, and African have different modern meanings and invoke different political and social affiliations than they did in antiquity, okay? But, you know, you have, see, what's happened is that you have this attempt to, one, colonize Egypt and make the greatness of Egypt seems like it's foreign to Africa. Make it seem like these were not Black African people who created this, who built the pyramids, who built the structures, who built the Tekken, etc. Okay, so you're going to have these various attempts to say that these were red-skinned Caucasians, or to depict them as being brown-skinned Caucasians, or depict them as being white. Anything but Black African, because they can't wrap their minds around, okay, how did these quote unquote Black people do this, but then their descendants, you had them enslaved. And so you have 1922, King Tut's tomb is discovered. 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte conquers Egypt. Okay. And this is 6 years before the Haiti declares its independence, April 1st, 1804. So you have these attempts to discredit Africa. They don't make these attempts for any other African nation to this extent, right? To try to claim it's European. Okay. Only really Egypt they do this to. All right. So this is what we're dealing with. You're dealing with this attempt to whitewash the history of Kemet, and then once it's conquered by Alexander the Greek, or Alexander the Great, 332 BC, then after that, then we refer to it as Egypt.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned Arsinoe, because Reya'Sekhmet has done independent study in addition to the whole Cleopatra thing, right? Yeah.
So what did you find out about Arsinoe, her sister?
Go ahead.
You said, yeah. What'd you find out about Arsinoe?
I found out that Arsinoe has African Black lineage.
Yeah. And it's important to note that, you know, the majority of the people who were still in Egypt at that time would be considered Black African people. So so a whole debate broke out over this back in 2023, and I had a lot of articles dealing with this. And see, the other thing is that because Egypt is controlled by Arabs, right? because the Arabs can conquer in 639, well, invade in 639 AD, conquer 642. But because they're in control now, and a lot of the Egyptian economy is based upon tourism.
Mm-hmm.
If they were to come out and say black people built all this, I'm telling you, the tourism dollars would disappear overnight. The majority
Exactly.
of that, a lot of people ain't flying hundreds of miles to go see something that black people built. Okay,
Right.
they're not. So there's a concerted effort from them not to really say this. And when I read articles, I've read numerous articles, Washington Post, New York Times. Every other week, there's a discovery coming out of Egypt. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
they don't tell you the ethnicity of those people. They'll say Egyptian, or they'll say ancient Egypt.
Yep.
They won't say Black African, nothing like that. They will not say that. So
Yep.
I said,
know,
okay,
I know,
okay,
but for the 8 to 12-year-olds listening, I'm
yeah,
sure this is blowing your mind right now, right?
right, exactly.
I remember watching the interview you did with Baba Charles Finch.
Yes.
And that was an eye-opening discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The depth of
Thank you.
knowledge shared in that conversation really helped me see how much of our history has been distorted. I just want to salute you for that interview. It was very
Thanks.
powerful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I thank you. I interviewed Dr. Charles Finch. I interviewed Dr. Malefikete Asante, because I really wanted to deal with that and talk about Cleopatra. I also interviewed Tony Browder, and we dealt with the importance of, why Nile Valley civilization is so important. We dealt with Cleopatra just a little bit, but it's understanding the the totality of it. But then also I tell people, don't get caught up in Kemet or Egypt. And what I mean by that is understand the relationship between Kemet to the rest of Africa. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Don't just focus on Kemet, because and now in one of my interviews with Professor James Small, when we dealt with the movie The Woman King, okay, back in 2022, we did a deep interview. And one part of it, we talked about how he asked, and I made a separate segment of this portion of the interview. He said, people always ask what happened to the ancient Egyptians. He said, we're talking to each other right now, because what happens is we know that the Arabs start enslaving African people in East Africa, in the Nile Valley region, about 652 AD. Okay. And we know that Arab slave trade of African people went on for hundreds of years before the transatlantic slave trade begins.
Correct.
Right. So you're going to have in like 8th century AD, 9th century AD, there are going to be waves of Africans from the Nile Valley region and from especially ancient Kemet that flee and go south. And they're also going to flee into what we call Central Africa and eventually going to West Africa. Okay. So African people don't stay put. They don't just stay in one place. They migrate. And then the descendants of those Africans from the Nile Valley region of Africa and from Kemet that eventually go into West Africa, centuries later, they're going to get caught up in the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. So and then when you look at, for instance, the Dogon of Mali, Burkina Faso, they come from ancient Kemet. They come from ancient Kemet. Now they start migrating before the Arabs invade, but we start seeing, and Dr. Shankar Job talked about this, but also Dr. Fukuyao. I interviewed Dr. Fukuyao some years ago before he passed away, who was a linguist, and he dealt with the relationship between Bantu languages and languages in West Africa and also ancient Kemet. Because when we see this migration of people from ancient Kemet, they're taking their culture with them. They're taking their language, their spiritual systems, all that, and it becomes something anew in West Africa. So it's important to understand that these similarities that we're dealing with between African people, even though we're dealing with over 1,000 languages and we're dealing with 54 countries right now, when we talk about, Black African people, it's important to understand the similarities between them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Michael, when we
Yes.
talk about African history, we cannot ignore the Maafa, which I've come to learn that means the Great Disaster that
Yes.
disrupted African civilizations and changed the course of history for millions of our people.
Yes.
Many people hear about the transatlantic slave trade, but they don't always understand the full scope of the Maafa.
That's right.
Well, Michael, can you first explain what the Maafa means for those listening who may not be familiar with the term? Where does it come from, and why is it used to describe this historical experience?
So the Maafa is a Kiswahili term that means the Great Disaster. It refers to our Holocaust, and that term, I don't know who first used it, but probably the person I first heard use it was Dr. Marimba Ani. She really popularized that term, especially in the early 90s. She wrote the book Let the Circle Be Unbroken. And then after that, she came out with her massive book, Yorugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. And it's also an attempt to use one of our words from a African language to define what happened to us as well, as opposed to using words from another language or English, like the transatlantic slave trade, using our words. Now, Kiswahili is not a traditional African language. It's a combination of Portuguese and Arabic and African languages, but it's the most widely spoken African language on the continent of Africa, Kiswahili. So that is an attempt also to have power over our own reality. Okay, using one of our terms to describe what happened to us and talk about the Maafa and to separate it from other Holocausts that have happened as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Shay, if I understand you correctly, the Maafa wasn't just about people being taken from Africa. It was about an intentional effort to disconnect them from their history, their language, and their self of sense, correct?
Yeah, generally speaking, you have different variations of it when we deal with the transatlantic slave trade, basically starting in the early 1440s with the Portuguese, and then ending in Brazil abolishes slavery in right about 1888. So you have a concerted effort to strip African people of their history, culture, language, spiritual systems, etc., folklores, mores, to varying degrees, depending upon who their colonizer was, depending upon where they went. They may be able to hold on to fragments of it more so than other places. Okay, but generally speaking, it's taking their identity away from them, stripping them of African history and culture, and superimposing a European cultural paradigm on top of them. Now we're going to resist, and we fought back against the transatlantic slave trade every step of the way, and we're going to hold on to aspects of our culture, of our language, and infuse that into what is being superimposed upon us. This is why to this day in this country, the Black church feels and looks different and sounds different than the white church does. Okay,
absolutely.
This is why we still have words like Nana for our grandparents. Okay, which comes from Ghana. This is why you have the tradition of pouring out of a bottle the first sip poured on the ground for the brothers who are not here, which is libations. Okay, so we still hold on to the various aspects of these traditions, even if we don't know that they're African. And then, as I just talked about when I led the tour of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History this past Thursday, watermelon dates back to about 5,000 years ago or so in ancient Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Black-eyed peas come from West Africa. They're called cowpeas. A lot of foods that we have today that we think are American are really African.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one of the things that's important to understand during the transatlantic slave trade, they didn't just take human beings out. They took people who were scholars, people who were architects, people who were physicians, but you had the drain of human capital. You had a massive brain drain out of Africa, okay? But also they're stealing artifacts. Now, I'm talking about during the transatlantic slave trade. They're taking art and statues and things like this. You have all of this taken out of Africa. Okay, so a lot of times people just look at bodies taken out, but it was so much more than that.
Yeah, they definitely stripped that continent of its wealth and parlayed it around the world. And you know what? It's crazy that that for me at least, to know that us as a people, we have to go through so much to find our history and our information, whether it's in a museum, in somebody's private collection, you see it in a Tekken, in DC or somewhere like that.
Right.
But to have people like you to be able to put it all together and make it make sense, helps
Right.
people like us and those that are watching. So I say to you, as I said many times, brother, hats off.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, our history is all around us. When you look at the universal symbol for medicine, okay, and you see the staff with two snakes wrapped around it, that comes out of ancient Kemet. That comes from the two staffs that Dahuti, okay, who was the netter of divine articulation of speech and the netter of science and things like this. That came from the staff that he carried. And then you had Hermes, which was a Greek deity. Hermes carried one staff that had the snake wrapped around it. But then also you see Mercury, which we see amongst the Romans, a Roman deity. He has the staff with the wings of Ma'at and the snakes wrapped around it. So it's called a caduceus. Okay. That comes straight out of ancient Africa. That comes straight out of ancient Kemet. So the African history is all around us. I talk about in my classes, we have to become history detectives. And I encourage people to get a dictionary or encyclopedia that deals with symbols. Okay. I have a symbols encyclopedia or dictionary somewhere around here.
Get you a symbol
right here.
encyclopedia.
Now, this is the one that I use. You don't have to get this one, but this is the one that I have. It's called Signs and Symbols, an illustrated guide to their origins and meanings. Okay. And this was I got this, I think it was Barnes and Nobles years ago. It's in full color. It was only about $10, $15. It's in full color. And on the first page is Heru.
Yeah.
Straight out of ancient Kemet.
Yep.
The first page is Heru. When you look on the cover, you see symbols from the metal netter. You see the caduceus right here. You see the caduceus?
Yep.
Then on the back, you see the ankh in the middle. Okay?
Sure is.
See the ankh in the middle. And it says, decode the secrets and uncover the origins and meanings of over 2,000 signs and symbols from ancient hieroglyphs, the metal netter, the pictographical form of the metal netter, to modern day logos. So the African history is all around us.
I'm grabbing that book.
Okay, so let's shift, family. Baba Michael, Juneteenth is often celebrated as the day slavery ended in the United States. But many people don't realize that this is not entirely true. The ancestor Baba Issa Hillier teaches us that one must be studied in layers and in chronological order.
Right.
Meaning that we can't just accept surface level narratives. We have to dig deeper to understand the full picture and keep it in perspective time frame. I really want to make sure I understand this correctly. Will you
Okay.
explain to the family the real history of Juneteenth? What actually happened on June 19th, 1865, and why is it often misunderstood as the official end of slavery?
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Good question. So,
Yeah, here we go.
okay, so June 19th commemorates June 19th, 1865,
Mhm,
when Major General Gordon Granger delivers what's known as General Order Number 3
mhm,
in Galveston, Texas. Now, this is 2 months after General Robert E. Lee surrenders April 9th, 1865 to General Ulysses S. Grant in Virginia. And that is looked at basically as the end of the Civil War. Um, the reason why there's misinformation about Juneteenth is because most Americans don't understand history. Okay,
mhm,
Juneteenth was not the last day of slavery. Yes, they delivered General Order Number 3 then, but there were 250,000 enslaved Africans in Texas. All of them did not get the word on June 19th that they were free. And um, they're going to go through, Major General Gordon Granger goes in with about 2,000 Union troops, most of them African-American men. And they're going to go all throughout the state of Texas, and they have to physically bring Texas back into the Union. Okay. Texas was
mhm,
part of the Confederacy, and Texas was a safe haven for slave owners who ran from surrounding states, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, etc. And they go into Texas with their slaves. So they have to go throughout Texas for about a year to bring it back into the Union and gain control of it. And as they go throughout, they're delivering General Order Number 3 and freeing the enslaved Africans. So Houston, Texas, Africans in Houston, Texas don't get their freedom till June 20th. Austin, Texas, they don't get their freedom to June 23rd. June 19th became the agreed upon date to celebrate freedom coming to African people in Texas, especially Galveston, Texas. But everybody did not get their freedom on June 19th. And Delaware and Kentucky did not abolish slavery until December 18th, 1865. This is 6 months after Juneteenth, because June 18th, 1865 is when the 13th Amendment is adopted. Okay, it's
mhm.
ratified December 6th, 1865, when Georgia becomes the 27th state to ratify the 13th Amendment. Now, what General Order Number 3 is doing, and actually I can show it here on the screen.
Okay.
I'll do a screen share. It is, what they're doing is enforcing partly the Emancipation Proclamation issued January 1st, 1863. And there's a misunderstanding dealing with history. And can you see this on the screen, General Order Number 3?
Yes.
Okay. So the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, contrary to what we learned in school when we were children, it did not free the slaves. It did not end slavery. Okay. Is going to be the 13th Amendment that amends the U.S. Constitution and ends slavery. So General Order Number 3 said, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Now, in 90% of the news media coverage that you're going to see, MSNBC, CNN, things like this, they're going to stop right there. Because I'm telling you right now, the past few years, the mainstream media coverage
Mhm.
of Juneteenth has caused me to literally want to throw things at the television. Okay. Because of the misinformation that they're putting out.
Right.
I'm all for celebrating Juneteenth, but we have to correct the history of Juneteenth and protect the history of Juneteenth, because there's a lot of misinformation. You're going to see it this year also. So about 90% of the news media, when they talk about this, they're going to stop right there and they're going to say this was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and these people were still enslaved. But they won't tell you that Delaware and Kentucky abolished slavery 6 months after Juneteenth. They won't say anything about that. They won't tell you that Tennessee abolished slavery February 22nd, 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. They won't say anything about that. They won't tell you that Maryland abolished slavery November 1st, 1864, after they put it on the ballot. They took a vote for it and it almost did not pass. That's almost 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay.
Wow.
Now, General Order number 3 goes on to say, and people can go to archives.gov, the U.S. National Archives, okay? Or you can go to loc.gov, the Library of Congress, and just Google General Order, search for General Order number 3. It goes on to say, this involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. They wanted the enslaved Africans to stay on the plantations there in Texas and work out a labor agreement and wages with their former slave masters. Okay, this is what General Order number 3 says. 90% of mainstream media are not going to tell you this. They're not going to show this to you. This is why we have to go read the original documents. This is why they didn't want slaves to learn to read and write. One of the things that we did when we learned to read and write, many of us wrote our own freedom papers and ran away because most white people couldn't read and write. Okay. Right. Okay. Now it goes on to say the freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present home and work for wages, because they didn't want us roaming around off the plantations. Okay. They wanted us to stay there. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Okay. Now this is what General Order number 3 says. This is what was read to the enslaved Africans there. Okay. Now, the reason why the Emancipation Proclamation did not free the slaves, because a lot of people get this history wrong, is there was a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation issued September 22nd, 1862 by Abraham Lincoln. This is during the U.S. Civil War. Civil Wars 1861 and 1865. Okay. And the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation said that the territories in rebellion, the states in rebellion, those part of the Confederacy, if they did not come back into the Union by January 1st, 1863, their slaves would be set free. The Emancipation Proclamation was a military strategy that Lincoln used to bring the South back into the Union. The goal was not to free the goal at that point, September 22nd, 1862, was not to free the slaves. The goal was to bring the South back into the Union, which was the economic engine of America, and to end the Civil War. Okay. But it had exceptions. When you go to the library, loc.gov, Library of Congress website, or archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, and you read the Emancipation Proclamation, it gives all these exceptions. And it says the border states, Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, and Delaware, they are exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation because they stayed loyal to the Union, so they were allowed to keep their slaves. It didn't apply to them. Okay, so this is why you have to go read the original documents. So that's why the U.S. Constitution had to be amended, because the Constitution sanctions slavery. Article 4, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution laid the foundation for the Fugitive Slave Acts of 1793 and 1850. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. And that's not even what people think it was, because that was talking about counting 3/5 of the slave population for the purpose of apportionment and taxation. Apportionment deals with determining how many seats in the U.S. House of Representatives a state will have. And apportionment plays a part when it comes to the Electoral College, which comes to choosing the president, because what determines how many Electoral College votes a state has, you take the number of seats in the House of Representatives a state has, you add to it how many U.S. senators they have. Each state has 2 U.S. senators based upon Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. And that tells you how many Electoral College votes was based upon population. So at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, they're going back and forth trying to figure out how do we count the slave population, because the South wanted 100% of the population counted to give them total dominance in the House of Representatives. The North is saying you don't even want to count them as human beings. You don't even want to recognize that they're human beings. And they're saying you'll have total control of the House. You'll have more representation in the House if you count 100% of the slave population. So they're going back and forth trying to figure out. Some say let's count half of the population. Others say let's count 3/4. So they compromise and say we'll count 3/5 of the population. It's not saying that we were 3/5 of a human being. That's a total misunderstanding. And that's not understanding the history behind the words of the Constitution. When you read the Federalist Paper number 54, the Federalist Papers explain the U.S. Constitution, explain different parts of it. So instead, if Virginia had 100,000 African slaves at that time, instead of counting 100,000 towards population, they would count 60,000 towards population. And this allowed the North to reduce some of the power that the South had in the House of Representatives and the Electoral College. That's the 3/5 compromise. A good article to read that goes deep into this history is by Dr. Paul Finkelman, called the 3/5 Compromise, Why Its Taint Persists. And he wrote it for the root.com some years ago. I interviewed him on the African History Network show, and we went deep into this history. But most people don't understand this. They just read the surface level and say, oh, it said we're 3/5 of a human being. No, that's not what that was saying.
Right.
And to this day, most people don't understand why, what determines how many electoral college votes a state has, and what they were, and the reason why they were debating this was because the first census was going to take place in 1790. The census was created by the U.S. Constitution. The census is taken each year, and to this day, that the census impacts the electoral college. So when you have somebody who says they want to put a citizenship question on the U.S. Census, they're trying to hurt states. They're trying to hurt more democratic leaning states that have a higher population of immigrants and possibly undocumented immigrants. They're trying to hurt them to suppress the count when it comes to population, which will ultimately reduce how many electoral college votes they have, which negatively impacts their ability to choose the next president.
Wow. So this is a good moment to kind of just check in with you, Reya'Sekhmet. Do you have a question for Baba Michael? I know this is a lot coming at you real fast, so just want to make sure that you're good.
I actually do have a question.
Go ahead.
So if I understand correctly, Juneteenth wasn't the day slavery ended. It was the day enslaved people in Texas found out they were free, even though slavery had technically been abolished 2 years later, right?
It was the date, the best way to explain it. It was the date that enslaved Africans there in Galveston, Texas, found out that they were free, because all of them in Texas did not find out on June 19th. So what happens is, and if you, so I have my slides up. There's a good article from blackpast.org called Juneteenth, the Growth of an African-American Holiday. This was one of the early, really good historical articles dealing with Juneteenth. June 19th became the agreed upon date to celebrate freedom coming to enslaved African people in Texas. But all of them did not get the word on June 19th that they were free, okay? And if we look at this here, this is from, because I just did a presentation for professors at Wayne County Community College here in Detroit. And this is some slides from my presentation that I used. It talks about how, let me see, where is that? It will, okay, right here. Although news of emancipation came at different times during that Texas summer and autumn in 1865, local blacks gradually settled on June 19th as their day of celebration. Beginning in 1866, they held parades, picnics, barbecues, and gave speeches in remembrance of their liberation. So when you get deeper into this history, you find out that, and also there's a good article called Five Myths About Juneteenth, that really gets deep into this history. And one of the things they talk about, we heard that there were slave owners in Texas that kept the slaves till the next year, 1866, and kept news away from them. Well, it wasn't so much that news was kept away from them. It was that they were kept in captivity because the Texas Confederate Constitution prohibited manumission, prohibited freeing them. So more than 100 Texas newspapers mentioned the Emancipation Proclamation between 1862 and 1865. The real reason people were still in bondage when Union troops arrived is because of local leaders there in Texas. The Texas Confederate Constitution prohibited manumission. Abraham Lincoln's directive was enforced only when federal soldiers got to Texas in June 1865. But keep in mind, they're going to have to amend the U.S. Constitution to legally end slavery because it was sanctioned by the U.S. Constitution. So a lot of people say that we really should be celebrating December 6, 1865, because that's when Georgia ratified the 13th Amendment. Georgia became the 27th state to ratify the 13th Amendment. Okay, and it gets adopted December 18th, 1865. I say we need to celebrate both because a lot of people don't understand this history. And in Juneteenth, we have to use this as a tool to teach history, economics, law, and politics. And Juneteenth becomes an opportunity for us to force into a national conversation a history that Republicans in state legislatures, and now we see the attack from the federal government on our history, they're passing laws to suppress the teaching of our history. Okay, so this gives us an opportunity to force into the national conversation this history, but we have to correct the history of Juneteenth and protect the history of Juneteenth.
Facts.
Michael,
did I answer your question,
Yes.
Reya'Sekhmet? Okay, go ahead.
Michael, you touched on General Order number 3.
Yes.
And while it's often seen as a moment of freedom for enslaved people in Texas, we know the reality was far more complicated.
That's
For
right.
the 8 to 12-year-olds listening, what were the immediate challenges newly freed Black people faced after the announcement of General Order number 3? How did it shape their fight for true liberation?
Well, in shaping their fight for true liberation, a number of things. Number one, if we look at, and I want to go back to one of the slides where it talked about the celebrations, because we were commemorating freedom each year. We had celebrations. So Juneteenth, one of the early names of it was Texas Emancipation Day, also Jubilee Day. Okay. It becomes a state holiday in 1979. But when we look at how it was celebrated, we were coming together. We're building schools. We're acquiring land. We're acquiring farmland. You have the U.S. Freedmen Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, the Freedmen's Bureau that gives some type of aid to newly freed slaves. You have the Freedmen's Bank that's created by Congress, because you have the radical Republicans in Congress, and they're trying to teach banking to former slaves and get us to save money that we're making, because the Civil Rights Act of 1866, not 1964, but 1866 Civil Rights Act gives us the right to negotiate wages and enter into contracts like labor contracts. Okay. But beginning in 1866, African Americans in Texas held parades, picnics, barbecues, and gave speeches in remembrance of their liberation. So we're creating various organizations to aid in our liberation, build schools, things of this nature. Now, we were not given, generally speaking, land. We were not given land after slavery ended. You did have Special Field Order number 15, that is commonly known as 40 acres and a mule. Okay, that whole
We
thing
just
is
talked
really
about that.
that whole thing is really misunderstood. Now, number one, it wasn't land in all of the South, and it wasn't promised to all of the former slaves. It was 400,000 acres of coastal land in South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia that was going to be divided into plots of up to 40 acres. It wasn't everybody got 40 acres. No. Okay. It goes to approximately 40,000 African-American families. The mule was added later, and the mule was to be loaned to them. Okay. Now, President Andrew Johnson, who succeeds Lincoln after Lincoln is assassinated in April 1865, President Andrew Johnson was, he was from Tennessee. He was sympathetic to the Confederacy and the former slaveholders, because keep in mind, Tennessee had seceded from the Union, joined the Confederacy, then they come back into the Union about 1862 or so. Okay. Now, Andrew Johnson is going to take back almost all that land back and give it back to the former slaveholders. So the type of aid that we needed, we were never given an economic foundation from the federal government so that we could be self-sufficient. Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. has a really deep article, and I'm not a big fan of Gates, but I have read dozens of his articles. He wrote some good articles for theroot.com. He has a good article dealing with the real history of 40 acres and a mule. Okay, so I encourage people to read that. And to give you an example, starting in 1862, you have what's known as the Homestead Act of 1862, where the U.S. government gives away 270 million acres of land up until 1976. And almost all that land goes to white people and white immigrants coming to this country. We're almost totally locked out of that massive land giveaway. So now we're going to make, tremendous gains in various areas, whether it's in education, whether it's acquiring land. We're going to acquire somewhere around 16 million acres of land by about 1910, 1920, farmland, things of this nature. But we're going to be at a massive disadvantage after slavery ends, because we were never given an economic floor to really thrive. Okay. And we're still feeling those effects today based upon the structural inequities that exist in this country.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So after Juneteenth, many blacks were technically free, but majority of our people had no land, no wealth, no resources.
Right.
What lessons can we today learn from what our ancestors went through back then?
Well, I think we can learn the importance of creating organizations. We're going to pull our resources together and buy land. We're going to create cooperatives. We're going to create labor. We're going to create labor organizations. We're going to create business organizations, whether it's Booker T. Washington and the Negro Business League, whether it's organizations like the Colored Merchants Association in 1928. And this was an organization of African-American grocery store owners. Okay. And they're pulling resources together so they can get economies of scale. They can buy food at a lower cost. They can exchange various business techniques, marketing techniques, things of this nature. So we see, every ethnic group in this country, they, for the most part, have their history and culture and language intact. And they use that to fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. We're going to see our people doing the same thing. We're going to see us organizing various civil rights organizations and various organizations to fight for our freedom, whether it's the Niagara movement, okay, 1905, whether it's the Afro-American Council of 1898, and you have T. Thomas Fortune, you have Dr. W.B. Du Bois is going to be a member of the Afro-American Council. Ida B. Wells is going to be a member of that. So we're going to see us fight. We're going to see Booker T. Washington make gains and focus on agriculture. We're going to see a big focus on agriculture and also skilled trades, acquiring skilled trades.
Okay.
During slavery, there was at least 262 skilled trades and crafts that we have from 1619 to 1865. We're going to see us continue in skilled trades to some extent, but also get locked out of it by white labor unions.
Mm-hmm.
Michael.
Yes.
It's making me realize that Juneteenth wasn't just about delayed freedom. It was about delayed justice. So if
Yes.
we're still seeing the effects of these systems today, what are some ways young people can go beyond just recognizing Juneteenth as a holiday and actually use it as a tool for education and empowerment?
Okay, excellent question. Excellent question. So I think learning the real history of Juneteenth and what we did after slavery ended, how we fought back, how we organized, the different types of organizations that we put in place. Number one. Number two, understanding the impact that law plays. Okay, because we're still dealing with the effects of the Civil War to this day. The Civil War, the Reconstruction era, 1865, 1877, the collapse of Reconstruction, and understanding politics. And one of the things that's going to take place is after Reconstruction ends in 1877, you're going to have the Jim Crow era where they're rewriting the state constitutions in the southern states to lock us out of political power, to impose poll taxes and literacy tests, also felony disenfranchisement laws, okay, to so the state that if you are convicted of a felony, then you lose your right to vote for life. Okay, we saw that in Florida. That their felony disenfranchisement law started in 1868. In Mississippi, it started in 1890 when you had the Mississippi State Convention where they rewrote the state constitution to impose poll taxes and literacy tests. So it shows us the importance and the value of politics and voting strategically. And it also shows how people have feared our vote for decades and feared Black political power. The other thing is a real dichotomy, is the real irony here, is that historically African Americans did not embrace prison culture and going to prison, okay? But because of negative corporate controlled hip hop, it gets marketed to us, especially in the 80s and in the 90s, especially in the 90s with quote unquote gangster rap, that this is something fashionable to do. You're supposed to go to prison, things of this nature. It's totally opposite to the history of African people. Okay, when they do things like that, that's totally opposite to the history of African people. So really understanding what happened to us after slavery ended and how we fought back, how we created institutions, how we created Morris Brown College, how we created churches and various organizations to empower ourselves. That teaches us what we need to do today as well.
Yeah, and we know the history, and having you on the show talking about the true history just solidifies our understanding of the true history of Juneteenth. But my question is, with all of this information, have you had anyone challenge you and to where they're so misled by the misinformation that you had to have a debate, or lack of a better term, a debacle with whomever it was you were trying to get the information through, that that they were so resistive of receiving this true information.
Well, there've been situations. I was on the Tammy Mack Late Show on the Fox Soul streaming network a few years ago, and I was on with two black conservatives. One was MAGA, one was Black MAGA. The other guy was he was a black conservative, and I don't, you know, like Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, I only debate my equals. Everybody else I teach. So I don't try to argue with people who I can tell don't know what they're talking about and don't understand history. But I start dropping the facts on them, dropping the history. And when you talk to them, most of those people, you realize they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand history. And with the black conservatives, two periods of time that they don't want to talk about is they don't want to talk about why Reconstruction ended with the Compromise of 1877 and the backroom deal that Democrats made with Republicans, so Rutherford B. Hayes could become president, who was the Republican candidate, and he agreed to remove the remaining Union troops out of the South so that the white Democrats could take back full control of the Southern state governments. Okay, so they don't want to talk about how Republicans betrayed African Americans with the Compromise of 1877. One. Two, they don't want to talk about the Lily White movement of 1928, which was a movement to push African Americans out of the Republican Party, which is why we started slowly going over to the Democratic Party, because Herbert Hoover was the Republican presidential candidate in the 1928 presidential election, running against a moderate Democrat named Al Smith from New York. And Republicans were trying to appeal to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to get them to vote for Al Smith. So they were ignoring the needs of African Americans, Republicans, ignoring the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, which gained resurgence starting in 1915 with the release of the movie The Birth of a Nation, that rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan. And and we're going to slowly get pushed out of the Republican Party. So that it's called the party realignment. And that begins with what's known as the Lily White movement in 1928. It concludes with the election of Richard Nixon in 1968, who runs on an anti-civil rights platform. Okay? And he was a Republican. So they don't want to talk about that. I would love to have a conversation with any of these black MAGA Republicans out there about that. Most of them don't know their history. Okay? So when I start dropping stuff like that on them, they back up. Okay, they realize, and even the guy, the black conservative, he said, okay, Michael's the smartest guy in the room. Okay, blah blah blah. So see, when you start dropping the facts on them, they can't deal with that. They run away. Knowledge is like kryptonite to them.
Exactly.
Yep. And then we also have to understand some people are not going to get it this lifetime. As Professor Kaba Kamene says, like Erica Badu says, maybe next lifetime. Some of them are not going to get it this lifetime. So, we have to help those who can help us help them. Everybody's not going to get this.
Facts.
Yeah. Okay, so now, Michael, it's time for a question from the Sekhmet Zone.
There you go.
This is where I will ask you a fun question. Imagine for a moment you're about to face one of the biggest debates on national television, to stand up against mainstream media's attempt to continue the spread of misinformation about African history, twisting the narrative just like they've done for generations.
Yeah.
So, Baba Michael, you need backup. My question is, if you could choose 3 historical figures to stand by your side and help you shut down false narratives, who would you pick and why?
All right. I would pick Dr. John Henrik Clarke. I would pick Malcolm X, and the third figure, probably Dr. King. Dr. King studied history. He studied African history. He studied the developments on the continent of Africa. And, during the civil rights movement, you're dealing with the Black liberation movement on the continent of Africa as well. And there's an article that AtlantaBlackStar.com had a few years ago called How Steel Sharpened Steel, STEEL, How Steel Sharpened Steel. And it dealt with the civil rights movement in America taking place at the same time of the African liberation movement, and how we were learning from each other and being inspired by each other. So I would probably say those three.
Ashe. If I
Yes,
had
I
to
say.
pick 3 historical figures to stand with me against misinformation, I'd choose the ancestor Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet Tubman, and the good sister Kathleen Cleaver. Fannie Lou Hamer's fearless truth-telling world cut through lies with raw honesty, while Kathleen Cleaver's calculated intelligence would dismantle media manipulation with precision. And Harriet Tubman, she's the ultimate liberator, because she will remind us that fighting misinformation isn't just about facts. It's about freeing minds from systems designed to keep us lost.
Okay, yeah, those 3 rivals your 3. She's been studying Fannie Lou Hamer.
Oh, yes.
And Harriet Tubman and Kathleen Cleaver. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Fannie Lou Hamer down in Mississippi. And Fannie Lou Hamer, I think, is underrated. When you look at the modern day civil rights movement, it was largely led by Black male Protestant ministers, and there was sexism within the civil rights movement. John Lewis talked about this. So Fannie Lou Hamer is one who I think is underrated, as well as Ella Baker. And Ella Baker co-founded SNCC, she co-founded SCLC in 1957, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with Dr. King.
Right.
And she ends up leaving SCLC because she gets passed over for a permanent leadership position in SCLC, because a lot of those men didn't think that women belonged in leadership positions, and Dr. King was one of them. So you had the sexism within that civil rights movement, which I think really arrested the abilities of many of our sisters in that movement. But yeah, Fannie Lou Hamer, that sister, and that sister owned guns too. That sister, that was a bad sister right there.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was. That's why Reya'Sekhmet has studied her.
Yeah.
Michael?
Yes.
One of the things Dr. Umar talks about is that media is one of the most powerful tools used to control the minds of Black people. He argues that misinformation is purposely spread to keep us disconnected from our true identity. I've seen firsthand how misinformation can shape people's beliefs. And I remember watching as you had to straighten out Jesse Lee Peterson when he was spreading false narratives about African history. That debate was funny.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesse Lee Peterson. Well, Jesse
had
Lee,
comedic ring to it.
Yeah, we were on the Tammy Mack Late Show, also on the Fox Soul streaming network. And okay, so funny. Here's a background story of that episode. What was supposed to the third guest was not supposed to be Jesse Lee Peterson. It was supposed to be Nephew Tommy from the Steve Harvey Morning Show. Nephew Tommy had a last minute scheduling conflict. So I didn't know it was Jesse Lee Peterson until I logged into, I think we were using Zoom as the portal. I log into Zoom and they have the placeholders for the guests, and I see Jesse Lee Peterson, and I'm like, what the heck? What is he doing here? Because I checked with her producer that morning. Yeah. And I said, okay, so let me, who do you have? So they said, okay, it's Dr. Umar Johnson, is you, and Nephew Tommy. Okay, so they had a last minute scheduling conflict. So I already knew about Jesse Lee Peterson. I already knew he was crazy. So I'm not going to sit there and argue with somebody who's crazy. I just let him go and say what he wants to say. And then when I speak, don't interrupt me. Okay. Right. But he kept interrupting me. He wanted to challenge me. So at the end, I had to go off on him. And I said, we can talk about the compromise of 1877, how Republicans betrayed African Americans, and we can talk about the Lily White movement in 1928. They don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was also necessary because there are so many Jesse Lee Petersons in the world. people who push misinformation and distort history to fit an agenda.
Right.
So my question is, beyond debating misinformation, I've also seen you on mainstream platforms like Roland Martin, Tammy Mack, and others bringing true knowledge to the masses. What is
Oh,
it
well,
like
that,
on those
oh, go ahead. Go
platforms?
ahead. Go ahead. What was the last part of the question?
What is it like being on those platforms, knowing that you're delivering real history in spaces where misinformation is often dominant?
Well, I've been in media 15 years now, and I've been on Roland Martin's show, Roland Martin the Filtered, for 5 years now. It'll be 5 years, October 2020. I've been on almost every Friday. Before that, I've been broadcasting the African History Network show 15 years. I used to guest host Roland's nationally syndicated radio show back in like 2016, 2017. That's how we actually connected, like 2015, 2016. So that's how we actually connected. So it is interesting. It can be a lot of fun because what you have to do is put the truth out, okay, and provide evidence. I like to provide evidence. I tell people you don't have to believe a word that I say. Proper documentation ends all conversation, and I learned that from Professor Professor Kabahai Kamene, one of my teachers, but also learned that from Professor Manu Ampim, who's a friend of mine. I've interviewed him a number of times. He's a history professor at Contra Costa College in California, and he deals with primary research also. So you put the information out. Roland has 1.7 million followers on YouTube. I have 1 million followers on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. So people get this information. They send me messages, they comment on the videos, they're blown away by a lot of this information. We still have a lot of work to do because white supremacy works 24 hours a day. It doesn't take a vacation, doesn't take a lunch break, doesn't take a doesn't take a coffee break, right? So we're dealing with this information from the media, but we can use the social media to get this information out, to educate our people on history, economics, law, and politics, and deal with the self-esteem of our people. I always say the reason why many of our people don't fight back is because many of our people don't think they are worth fighting for. Okay, their self-esteem has been so damaged, and they've been shown these caricatures of themselves that they have been taught to emulate, that it reduces their desire to want to fight back.
Wow. Yeah. Facts.
That's so powerful. If I
Thank you.
understand correctly, media isn't just telling stories, it's shaping how people see themselves. I got to go back to when I see the clip of you correcting Jesse Lee Peterson. I saw how misinformation isn't just accidental, it's strategic.
Yeah.
It
Right.
appears that people like him push false narratives that make Black people doubt their own history, their own greatness. Would you say the way African history is presented in mainstream media is a part of a bigger effort to control how Black people view their own history? And if so, how can we begin to challenge these false narratives?
Well, okay, good question. Yeah, so you have a lot of these Black conservatives. They make money off of dehumanizing our people and lying to our people. They make money off of that. When we deal with the way African history is depicted in mainstream media, etc., even within the lie, there are threads of the truth. Okay, so when we see these various stories, like I will see stories dealing with ancient Egyptian history and the discovery that comes out of ancient Egypt. And in the article, they'll talk about Osiris, and they'll talk about Isis and things like this in the article coming from NBC News or what have you. So even though they're using the Greek terms for these Neteru coming out of Kemet, these deities coming out of Kemet, it gives us a foundation to then introduce them to the truth. It gives us a doorway, okay? So when you have the New York Times talking about something, or for instance, there was an article from the New York Times around 2010 that talked about how stone tools on the Greek island of Crete, stone tools date back 130,000 years ago. So it's causing scientists and archaeologists to realize that people were sailing 130,000 years ago, but they don't say that these were African people. But 130,000 years ago, those were the only people on the face of the earth.
Right.
So it gives you a doorway, okay, into it. So you can use this as a foundation to then take them a step further. Okay, so but yeah, we have to fight back against the media. This is programming. Okay, your thoughts create feelings, your feelings create actions and behaviors, your actions and behaviors create results. So any of this, the TV shows, the media, the news programming, these is programming. Programming could be either good or it can be bad. Okay, so this is why in my degrees in business administration with a major in marketing, the foundation of marketing is psychology. So at the same time in college, I'm studying African history outside of the classroom, but I'm studying business and marketing inside of the classroom. So I see how I saw how the two, came together. And so we have to be able to fight back against that programming, but understand it for what it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So, Michael, I'm really interested in your name. Will you share with the family about your unique name and what it means to you? Like, basically, how did you land on the name Michael Imhotep?
Well, I've had the name Imhotep back in college. So Imhotep means he who comes in peace in the ancient Medu Neter language. Imhotep was one of the greatest people who ever lived in human history. He's known as the father of medicine. He was the architect for the step pyramid for Nesubiti-Zoser in the third dynasty, somewhere around 2700 BC. Depending upon which timeline of history you look at, the dates could be 200 to 300 years off. He was when you look at Hippocrates, who the Greeks say was the father of medicine. Hippocrates says that he was a child of Imhotep. So Imhotep was one of the greatest people who ever lived in human history, and he was known as a multi-genius. He was known as really the world's first multi-genius also. So I've had that name for for decades. Originally it was Imhotep Shango Heru, but I had that name for decades.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Brother Michael, is there
Yeah.
anything that we didn't touch on today that you want to talk about, or do you want to go in depth anymore with Juneteenth or anything like that?
No, I think we've given the people enough. I think we've given the people enough to make them want to do some research. I would say people can visit my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Follow me on social media, the African History Network, and on Facebook and fan base, as well as Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, on YouTube and Instagram. Okay. And the information, we have a new online class starting up in a couple of weeks. It's either going to be June 28th or Saturday, June 28th, or Saturday, July 5th. I'm going to nail it down. It's going to be 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we'll have that. You can get the information there at my website and register for that as well. But we should celebrate Juneteenth, but we have to incorporate history, economics, law, and politics into it. It cannot just become a Black 4th of July where we have a day off and we have a cookout and don't even really understand what it is that we're celebrating. Okay, so I would leave people with that.
Yeah, yeah. Is there any speaking engagements or community practices? I know you got the guided tours that we've seen.
Yeah, I just did the guided tour to Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. I did that Thursday. That was Thursday, June 12th. It was for a nonprofit organization here in Detroit, New Detroit. And so I'm going to start giving guided tours. I'm looking at setting that up and start giving guided tours, because the main exhibit at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History is called "And Still We Rise." So it takes you through ancient Africa, through the transatlantic slave trade, Reconstruction era, World War I, World War II, and it has a lot of Detroit history also. So I'm going to start giving guided tours of that, because people have been asking me to give guided tours. So it'll probably be about probably about a 2-hour guided tour all through those exhibits. So people can look out for that as well, and watch me on Fridays on Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network, because I don't just deal with history. I also deal with politics. I'm a national political commentator, and I bring a unique blend of understanding the history as well as understanding the politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been blessing us today with so many gems. Do you have a way for the family to show their appreciation and or donate, or some way for the family to?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. At my website, we have our Cash App and PayPal $ the AHN show through Cash App. And I actually have a graphic there, because people have set up a fake African History Network Cash App account stealing money from us. So I actually have the graphic there with the link. So, it goes to us. And then also paypal.me/the AHN show. So that helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, register for my online classes also. That helps as well. And the video, especially my videos on Facebook, like those, comment on them, share them as well, because that helps us grow, and that helps us also.
Absolutely.
Michael, are
Yes.
there any current authors or scholars whose work you follow and find influential? And do you have any books or resources you would like to recommend to the family?
He's giving us a wealth of books throughout the interview.
You say any authors that I've worked for?
Yeah. No.
That you find influential.
Yeah.
Oh, authors that I find influential. Sure. Tony Browder. We look at some of the books here. Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. He was a friend of mine. I interviewed him about 13 times on the African History Network show. He's an ancestor now. Dr. Malefi Keti Asante. It's a number of authors. When we talk about this book, I need to just hold up books for you. We just lost Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu.
Yes,
I knew Jawanza Kunjufu, and one of the times I was a guest co-host of the Mildred Gaddis show here in Detroit, WCHB 1200 AM. He was a guest. This is Hip Hop versus Mott, a psychosocial analysis of values by Jawanza Kunjufu. His book, Black Economics. Jawanza Kunjufu, I read that in college. Black Economics, excellent book. But we have people. It could be anybody like Dr. John Henrik Clarke, like I showed you. Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism. Runoko Rashidi was a friend of mine as well. Runoko is an ancestor. This is one of Runoko's books here, Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe. And this deals with some of the history of the Moors in Europe. So it's a number of authors. The father of Black liberation theology, James H. Cone. James H. Cone wrote this book, Martin Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare, which is one of the best analysis of Dr. King and Malcolm X in their evolving ideologies. And he shows here how toward the end of both of their lives, their ideologies were converging. And we know Malcolm joins the civil rights movement when he separates from the Nation of Islam in March 26, 1964, when Malcolm meets Dr. King for the first and only time at the civil rights debate, the U.S. Senate civil rights debate. He tells Dr. King, I'm throwing all of my effort into the heart of the civil rights movement. And Malcolm joins the civil rights movement. And his speech, The Battle of the Bullet, one of the themes of The Battle of the Bullet is to interject Black nationalism into the civil rights movement. Okay, right. So it's a number of authors. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. It's a number of authors.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now that you know a little more about Baba Michael, support Baba on all social media platforms, especially the African History Network website. Don't take our word for none of this information provided today. Do your research. One more time. Do your research. One more time for the family.
Way in the back.
Do your research.
Right.
Baba Michael.
Yes.
Well, before we close out with final word, I do want to say something real quick. And,
Sure.
And that is, Reya'Sekhmet has just concluded with you her season finale episode, and the Ammut Institute has awarded you the podcast of the year for the state of Iowa.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Show the family. Show the family.
How long have you been doing your podcast?
I've been doing it for 2 years.
2 years? Okay. Congratulations.
2 years, but only 1 year has it been publicized and doing it on social media, like platforms like YouTube or
Okay.
and
Instagram. Right.
yeah, and things like that. But
Right.
we had to hone her skills to the point where we were comfortable enough to let her go and start meeting with people and putting her out there. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's good.
I say to you, you've done an amazing job with these interviews and presenting information. So thank you for allowing us to spend time with you.
Thank you.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. This could develop into a career for you. This could develop into a career for you.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to leave you all with a story, one that connects us to everything we've talked about today. So, family, imagine you're at a basketball game. Your team is on the court, but there's a problem. The referee is calling unfair fouls. The scoreboard is rigged, and the other team controls the clock. No matter how hard your team plays, the game feels stacked against them. Now you have 3 choices. 1, keep playing by the rules, hoping they'll eventually be fair. 2, walk off the court, refusing to play at all. 3, build your own court where you control the rules, the clock, and the scoreboard. This is exactly what's happening in policy. Some Black leaders say we should keep playing the game and vote, push for policy changes, and demand fairness. Others say we should walk away, stop relying on the system, and focus on self-sufficiency. And some say we need to build our own court, create Black-owned businesses, schools, and media platforms so we can control our own future. So the big question is, what's the best strategy? Do we fight within the system, separate from it, or create something new? That's what today's conversation was all about.
Right.
Understanding history, making smart choices, and deciding how we move forward. And for our young listeners, 8 to 12-year-olds, remember, you are a part of this game. Whether you're learning history, supporting Black businesses, or speaking up for what's right, you're helping to change the rules for the future. Well, Michael, as we round out our discussion, I want to give you the final word.
Well, I would encourage people. I would just say, what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you've been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So I would say we need to study our history, study economic empowerment, study politics, study political empowerment, control the economics in our communities as well. And, I will leave it at that. I say right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And thank you all for having me.
There you have it, family. Until next time, please absolutely devour the like button and subscribe.
Unity, family.
Peace and love is the key.
Peace. Hotep.
Peace and love is the key. The owl represents the essence of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, and humanitarian reciprocity and righteousness.
J&J-Life podcast podcast was created to give the family a place and platform to embrace their spiritual awakening and consciousness. J&J-Life from Odd is dedicated to showcasing the beauty of our culture and educating our people and those that want to learn this work.
Smash that like button. Peace and love is Nikki.